So for those wondering, long COVID is a thing that causes a variety of physical issues. And for me, standing more than about 5 minutes is one of the long symptoms. So thank God for stools. Now, I want to begin by saying I love science and I love Darwin's evolutionary theory and the work he has done. Charles Darwin really changed the game in terms of our understanding. And when we talk about Darwin, we usually start off with two phrases: natural selection and survival of the fittest. But hear me out. We're getting it wrong. Not because those things aren't right, but because that's not the end of the evolutionary story. Instead, the story is really about cooperation and friendliness. Cooperation is the key to our survival as a species because it increases our evolutionary fitness. Arguably, no folk theory of human nature has done more harm or is more mistaken than the survival of the fittest. To Darwin, yes, and even modern biologists, survival of the fittest refers only to the ability to survive and leave behind viable offspring. That's it. It's about reproductive biology. Yet it's often been used, and sometimes cruelly, to justify the discrimination and dehumanization of others. And it permeates our society. Only the fittest, the most able-bodied, and most beautiful survive, right? But in actuality, Darwin was constantly impressed with the kindness and cooperation he observed in nature. And he wrote that these communities, which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members, would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. In other words, the best way to win at evolution is to maximize friendliness so that cooperation flourishes, and thus do the species. Now, many, probably most species cooperate, from the bacteria and microbes that live in our bodies, to the birds and the bees who help pollinate plants, to entire ecosystems that rely on friendliness, the intentional or unintentional cooperation of positive behavior toward one another. Evolutionary anthropologists Brian Hare and Vanessa Woods began to wonder if that kind of cooperation, which seems to be a main trait of Homo sapiens, modern humans, is what gave this species of humans the evolutionary edge. Now, when you look at the history, the edge wasn't a given. Other human species seemed to have fitter advantages. Some had bigger brains, some had the ability to create tools and speak and adorn themselves, care for each other, bury their dead. Some human species even evolved to weather colder climates. Homo sapiens, by those standards, wouldn't have been the odds-on favorite to survive. But something happened in the 25,000 years or so between our first appearance as a species and when most of the other human species died out. We had begun developing not just tools, but projectile weapons, which revolutionized hunting, which didn't just keep us safer, but expanded our diets. We created fishing nets and blades and snares. We ventured out of Africa and began crossing great bodies of water in boats. And this would have required planning for food and tools, and to quote Hare and Woods, most remarkably, these sailors had to infer that there was something beyond the horizon. Perhaps they had studied the patterns of migratory birds or seen the smoke of natural bushfires in the distance. Even if this was the case, they would have had to imagine that there was somewhere to go. We began living in camps filled with not just dozens of people, but hundreds of people, organized with areas for various tasks: cooking, sleeping, butchering, teaching. We used fire, we made clothing, we began to expand our social networks. We started to trade. Our ability to create art moved beyond representation into storytelling. We behaved and looked like modern humans, eclipsing other human species and becoming not just dominant, but the one human species that survived. Heron Wood suggests that what allowed us to thrive while other humans went extinct was a kind of cognitive superpower, a particular type of friendliness called cooperative communication. This means that we developed a way to communicate and learn from each other's behaviors, pass on innovations, work together, inherit and pass on knowledge, and form relationships. They found that our emotions are key to sophisticated social understanding and strategies. Heron Wood suggests that this process is kind of a self-domestication, meaning that as we evolved, we saw the benefits of friendliness and have evolved to coordinate and collaborate and communicate in increasingly complex ways, allowing us to innovate and share those innovations and further coordinate and cooperate and collaborate. Now, interestingly, our researchers found that dogs and our closest cousins, the bonobos, also seem to have gone through this kind of self-domestication, becoming friendlier and more able to communicate in fairly complex ways. So, yes, says the owner of 3 cats, in this one limited way, yes, dogs are better. But by studying various other animals, Heron Woods were able to understand the evolutionary benefits of self-domestication and how this might have happened over time. Now, in their book, Survival of the Friendliest, there's a couple of 100 pages explaining their experiments, which began with a dog named Oreo. And for a deeper dive, I do invite you to read their book, Survival of the Friendliest. It came out about 5 years ago, I think. So, you didn't come here for a lesson on evolutionary biology. I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but I suppose you're beginning to think, as I did, if friendliness is such a key to our being human, why are people so awful to each other? So the short answer, I think, is that when we form communities and cooperate within them, we begin to feel protective. And when we feel that our group is being threatened by a different group, we are able to separate them from us, which then allows us to dehumanize them. Where empathy and compassion would have been, there's nothing. Those we perceive as outsiders are no longer humans the way we are. And the rhetoric of dehumanization flourishes, not just by calling others animals, but by using language to elicit disgust and vilification, which then sets a norm, drawing hard lines between us and them, removing the ability to even communicate, no less come to any kind of compromise. We shift from survival of the friendliest back to survival of the fittest, mistaking power and control for progress. Now, some of this is, biological, it's hormonal. Oxytocin and serotonin have a lot of impact on how we perceive safety and threat. Love for our own group enhances our fear and aggression towards strangers. And when we isolate only in our own groups, we become even more fearful and aggressive. This is why our vision of beloved community is at once so beautiful and so hard. We envision a world where those divisions are not things to be afraid of, where the people unlike us are actually people too. We envision a world where our propensity for cooperation and collaboration means everyone has enough and we live in peace. And we can dream this, we can see the dream, but it's so hard to make real when there's so many working so hard to keep us separated from one another. As Heron Woods point out, across time and culture and country, the underlying psychology is always the same. To initiate the cycle of dehumanization, extremists may convince their own group that they are being dehumanized by another. As the real or perceived threat level increases, even people in the middle move away from the bullseye and closer to the outer circle of the target and become primed for violence against their enemies. Without a humanizing or galvanizing cause like a common threat that can be used to unite the different sides, those in the moderate middle struggle to bring extremists and ideologues back to the negotiating table. And we know that our fear of the other diminishes when we have contact with those who don't share our culture or our experiences, when we have a chance to connect with the humanity in others. We are less likely to other a group of people when we know someone who belongs in that group. Suddenly we see their eyes, hear their voices, sense their life force. We know them as human, just like us, and that softens the fear reaction and changes attitude. Just this past week, I was in an intensive course on James Baldwin, the amazing writer, civil rights leader. And he talked about how he went from not thinking about whites to being very angry and hating them, but then saying, I can't hate white people because they're human too, and they are, in his words, as stuck in this system of dehumanization as we are as Blacks. And I kept thinking about this. So I just wanted to make a note, this is not theoretical. This is what people experience all the time. But when we open ourselves up, when we meet people, when we meet them and hear who they are, who they love, what they think, we aren't just making connections and changing attitudes. We are communicating. We are collaborating. We are beginning to see how our fates are tied up with one another, how our work of liberation helps everyone, including us. We are never going to reason each other to the beloved community. We must do it through our evolutionary power, the power of friendliness. We must be willing to break down the walls that divide us. Heron Wood's self-domestication hypothesis suggests that we are designed for contact, and that contact produces a positive effect. Now, we felt some of this during the isolation period of the pandemic, right? Many of us remember that we felt a little fearful when we left our homes, and for good reason. And I was thinking about this the other day when I went to Safeway, that there was a really hard time when going to the grocery store required sort of facing a sense of danger. Remember that? When we make contact with others and when we are in community with a variety of others, it is easier to feel friendly and empathetic toward others when we understand what we really fear and how we can work together to combat those fears. We still need that empathy and friendliness, even as the pandemic has become an endemic. I noticed that it's been a little harder to connect with others. We've gotten used to meetings online, which is great for when it's snowing outside, right? Let's not kid ourselves. But we're ordering our groceries and streaming our movies. Our friendships have suffered. And I think it's easy to fall into the trap of us versus them when that's what the media, social media, the news, and entertainment tell us is the way of the world. It's certainly what we see in politics right now. But if we are to build the beloved community, truly build it, truly draw the circle of love wide, we must connect to one another. We must collaborate with one another, nurture one another, and be nurtured by one another. We have an evolutionary superpower. We must use that to draw the circle of love wide.